This is The Dragon's Roar by Priestess of Groove, narrated by RileyRoxx. Chapter 19. Jaime 5. Jaime Lannister stood at the prow of the ship, watching Lannisport draw closer. The wind whipped up at his jet-black cloak, as the ship bobbed in the turbulent water. But he remained steadfast and unmoving. A storm was brewing, both outside in the open air and inside Jaime.
"I come home to take my place as heir, and you want to fight, father,"
Jaime thought, as his eyes looked past Lannisport, towards Casterly Rock, where thousands of tents of the Westerland's army could be seen between here and there. They shouldn't be there. If his father had heeded his orders, they'd be halfway to King's Landing at this point, ready to intercept Renly Baratheon and prevent him from seizing the seat of power. And yet, here the army remained. What was more is that there was a festive quality to the place. Lannisport was always thriving, but with the thousands of soldiers in the area, it was now booming. He suspected there was more to this celebratory atmosphere than just a whole bunch of soldiers in town to spend their hard-earned gold. He finally tore his eyes away from the city and settled directly onto the docks, where he could see a welcome party. His father, or anyone of particular standing in the Lannister family, was nowhere to greet him. It was a slight. He had signed his letter to Tywin as Hand of the King, and yet here he was being greeted by Sir Adam Mariband. Not that he wasn't pleased to see Sir Adam. He'd grown up alongside him in Casterly Rock and considered him a friend. But someone in his position deserved to be greeted with far more decorum. This was his first test. Not only did he have to prove to his father that he was Hand of the King, it meant legitimizing his new king's rule. He had not lied to Aemon when he said that Tywin Lannister would be the first on his knees to pledge his allegiance for saving his golden heir. Tywin Lannister would do that, but he would only do that if Aemon Targaryen was a king worth following. Not to mention in what way it would benefit House Lannister. At barely 6 and 10, it would be difficult to prove that Aemon had what it took to rule, let alone prove the legitimacy of his rule.
"But it's too late for that, father. I'm Hand of the King. I have pledged myself to Aemon. House Lannister is already in far too deep. You would disown your own golden heir to deny this allegiance."
Of course Tywin wouldn't. He had a feeling he could fuck every whore between here and King's Landing, and it would still not diminish him in the eyes of his Lord Father, like it did Tyrion. This was a test, and he was ready for it. It first started with appearance, which could be the most difficult part. Despite there being no mirror aboard his tiny ship, Jaime had done the best he could looking into a pail of water. Being on a ship also meant there had been little in the way of bathing water. He'd had about 3 outfits to trade between all, and all of them bore various stains from either vomiting or sweat. He was currently dressed in the 4th outfit he had taken. It was to be his formal attire when negotiating with the Tyrells. He wore a Lannister crimson jerkin done up to one side with 25 golden buttons, with black trim on the shoulders and black trousers with shiny black boots. He imagined to most it would make him look more Targaryen than Lannister, but the idea was to intimidate. And if the soldiers standing far behind him were any indication, it was effective. He loathed being at sea, and he was one of the few who hadn't succumbed to seasickness. For the most part, the sea had been calm, but on those few days where the water frothed and rocked, his new ability to see sounds overwhelmed him. From horizon to horizon, The sound of the ocean lifted up from the water like bubbles floating into the air. It was also at these times that the captain was at his most temperamental, screeching at his crew members in hues of bright red that cut through his vision to stab at his brain. He managed to buy the captain's cabin from him on the voyage, and it was on those days that he hid himself and hugged a bucket, gritting his teeth against the headache that assailed him. He managed to avoid having a seizure, but how, he wasn't sure. He knew it was dangerous to not disclose his condition to his soldiers, but his own pride warred against the idea of leaning on another, and not surprisingly, it seemed to have the voice of Tywin Lannister. His anger at Jaime's injury might even surpass his anger at Jaime for losing his hand. For all the golden hand had been a poor disguise, it was still a symbol of wealth of House Lannister. All the gold in Casterly Rock couldn't hide or buy him out of his current condition, and that would incense his father. Not that he had any intention of letting the old lion know. He and Aemon had come to a private agreement to conceal his condition as long as possible. If he played things smartly, the ability would give him the upper hand in negotiations. He just had to survive the headaches and the possibility of seizures. However, there remained the problem that during one of his seizures, he could vomit, choke, and die. He needed someone there to make sure that didn't happen. Someone he could implicitly trust, and if he wasn't mistaken, that someone was currently residing at Lannisport. Was it good fortune that he wouldn't have to gamble not seizing for months, or ill luck that his father chose this moment to test his son's patience? It was too difficult to say, and he wished not to dwell on it. Rhaegar's harp was slung over his right shoulder, and he gripped the lone strap, holding it to him tightly. A soldier had once tried to take the harp case from him in the interest of helping, and very nearly got stabbed through the gut for his troubles. No one had been allowed to touch the case, and all of the soldiers gave it an equally wide berth as they were giving him now. The boat sidled up right next to the dock, and a gangplank was lowered for easy walking. Sir Adam Maribran smiled and nodded at him as he stepped out onto dry land. He was a little shorter than Jaime, with thick brown hair swept back and hazel eyes. "Sir Jaime." "Sir Adam," Jaime replied in acknowledgement, but it was in a low, quiet voice, and there was no courteous smile. His own eyes slowly swept over the entourage, and he was privately pleased to see a few of the soldiers shift where they stood. Before he finally locked eyes back with Sir Adam, "It's Lord Jaime now," he replied, not impolitely. Adam's eyes widened and he bowed. Lord Jaime, it's good to see you return to the rock," he said in a voice tinted in a forest green, but it wavered ever so slightly. Jaime had to fight to keep his pleased smirk off his face. "Sir Adam, I expected my father, of all people, to know the ceremonies necessary to greet the hand of the king. So tell me, why is there no one from House Lannister here to greet me?" Adam's eyes grew even larger, if that was at all possible. Your father sends his apologies. He had urgent business to attend to." "I see," Jaime said, with a slight sneer in his voice. Sir Adam's squire stood at the ready with the reins of 3 horses, and he hurriedly bowed when Jaime came up to him and held out the reins to a jet-black palfrey. He mounted swiftly and smoothly, ever the graceful lion. "Very well. Seeing as my father was unable to greet me in person, I don't see the point in rushing to him. If I recall, there's a well-known craftsman who works on musical instruments here in Lannisport." "Yes, Luther. Allow me to show you the way." They took a detour through the streets. The people and soldiers fell away from them like sheep being herded by dogs. The soldiers stood to attention as they passed, looking nervous, and the townsfolk were awed. The people of Lannisport had known him well as a young boy, and in all likelihood never expected to see him again once he donned the white cloak of the king's guard. A few actually cheered as he passed. How many knew that he'd been on the chopping block merely 6 weeks ago? When they arrived at the luthier, Sir Adam followed Jaime inside the shop, where a whole host of stringed instruments stood dangling from the ceiling and lining the walls. The craftsman was an aging fellow, with his wild grey hair, and judging by the young boy at his side, he was teaching the ways of his craft. It did not take long for Jaime to get his order sorted, but when he opened the case, the man saw the Targaryen seal, and he very nearly choked. "Please, handle this with care. I will reward you handsomely for it," Jaime said. There was a dangerous light to his eye. He was loath to separate from the harp, after he had promised Aemon to always keep it. But he felt it important that the harp be restored to its former glory, as though it would somehow restore the Targaryen line to the throne as well. The luthier actually blustered, and fell all over himself to make assurances, but Jaime paid him no mind. "I expect this to be ready in 5 days' time," he ordered, and strode back out once more to pull himself onto his horse. "Lord Jaime, if you don't mind my prying, was that Prince Rhaegar's harp?" Sir Adam asked. Jaime shot him a withering look. He didn't need all of Lannisport to know that the harp was at the luthier's. So he nodded silently and nudged his horse forward. The moment they stepped out of the city, they stepped into the tents. The Westerland's army was so vast that the soldiers' tents stretched from there to Casterly Rock. Someone, at least, had the foresight to carve a number of roads through the tents for easy passage. As they rode their way through, soldiers were pointing at Jaime, and a cry was raised, welcoming their heir back to Casterly Rock. Jaime paid them little mind. His focus was entirely on the rock. He turned to Sir Adam and asked, "Tell me, do I have your loyalty?" His friend looked startled. "Of course, my lord. House Maribran will always be loyal to the Lannister—" "No," Jaime interjected. "Not the Lannisters. Not my father. Me. Do I have your loyalty?" I don't understand," Sir Adam replied. "I don't like demanding individual oaths. I wouldn't be doing this if this wasn't serious. If the situation were to arise that you would have to choose between me or my father, who would you choose?" Sir Adam was sweating in his armor, and he was certain it had nothing to do with the sultry weather. Thunder suddenly cracked overhead, and the wind picked up. Soon Jaime could feel rain plopping onto his head and his arms, but he only had eyes for Sir Adam. "You have my loyalty, Lord Jaime," his friend finally replied, though in a quiet voice so that no one else could hear. Jaime nodded. He didn't need a shout to the heavens. Better his father didn't catch wind of this before they arrived. Even as the rain began to pour more earnestly, Jaime kept the party's pace deliberate and steady. If you don't mind my asking, Lord Jaime, how did you come about that scar?" Sir Adam asked. Jaime had almost forgotten it was there. His smile became far away, as though he were recalling a fond memory, but in truth, it was a bitter amusement. "A mammoth bear in the north tried to make a meal of Lord Stark's heir. I put myself between it and him, but I came away with a souvenir." "If I may say so, you look even more formidable now." "Good." As soon as they entered the mouth of the lion, Jaime instantly locked eyes on the unfettered form of Sir Gregor Clegane, cleaving through the unfortunate dungeon inhabitants to, no doubt, sate his bloodlust. Jaime actually grinded his teeth and growled. Yet another slap in the face by his father to see more orders unheeded. A young man was working the lift up into Casterly Rock, and Jaime saw him visibly swallow when he and Sir Adam entered the lift. He paid the lad little mind, but he imagined the glare on his face caused him to fear for his life. When the lift reached the main floor, Jaime disembarked and took note of the rainbow of cheery voices emanating from the grand hall. 2 guards flanking the doors stepped forward and opened them wide to reveal all of the lords of the Westerlands, their children and wives gathered around tables bearing food fit for a king. With the onslaught of the storm outside, a vast array of candles had been lit to light the area. Stepping through the doors felt almost like stepping into another world. For as soon as the crowd caught sight of him, their voices fell away immediately as they turned to stare.
Ah, my son Jaime has returned to take his place as heir to Casterly Rock,
Tywin called out to the hall, his voice as gold as the Lannister colors. If the light were so dim, Jaime thought he might see the closest Tywin came to smiling since his wife died. The lords and ladies cheered, holding up their goblets in a toast. Jaime continued down the hall, stopping just short of the high table. Now that he was closer, it was difficult to miss the rather prominent placing of Lord Leffart and his daughter Alysanne Leffard. She was a young woman, of no more than 6 and 10, with her dark hair pinned up, allowing only a few strands of ringlets to frame her face. She smiled widely at him. She was pretty, but she was not Brienne. After a gesture from Tywin, he was handed a goblet of wine.
On the morrow he shall be wed, and
Jaime tossed the goblet and the wine splattered all over the floor and the cloth on the high table. Tywin actually seemed surprised, and the lords and ladies affected expressions of offense.
there will be no wedding,
Jaime said firmly.
Tell me, father, why are you here and not currently at King's Landing, heading off Renly Baratheon, as I ordered?
A hush fell over the hall. Tywin stared at him, his face stone, but there was a fire building behind his eyes, like he was a volcano ready to erupt.
Perhaps we should take this conversation elsewhere,
Kevin said, from next to his father. Jaime raised his right arm in a gesture to lead the way.
By all means, uncle. I would hate to further embarrass my father so publicly,
he replied, in a voice cracking like thunder. He swept behind his father and Sir Kevin, with Sir Adam hard on his heels. The side room they walked into was little more than a private dining area. A fire was roaring in the grate next to the table, but it currently lacked the candles of the main hall, casting them all in a warm orange glow. His father rounded on him, practically growling in a sickening blood-red color.
What in the 7 hells do you think you're doing?
Jaime's eyes appeared to glow in the firelight as he snarled in turn.
What do I think I'm doing? What are you doing? I know you couldn't have missed my signature that explicitly pronounced me as Hand to the King, Aemon Targaryen, first of his name, rightful ruler of the 7 kingdoms, king of the Andals and the Rhoynar and the First Men.
Fittingly, his voice mirrored the dancing light of the fire, swirling around them in bright orange tones. Sir Kevin looked flabbergasted. His father must not have allowed him to read that letter.
Your king doesn't have the authority to rule anything yet,
Tywin growled.
I will not accept a Targaryen as king over my own grandson."
Jaime blinked at him and then barked out a cold laugh.
"Forgive me, father. I didn't realize you must be going senile. Perhaps I am mistaken. But you couldn't have also missed the letter stating that my twin Cersei claimed her children as mine. Your precious grandson is a bastard and has no claim to the throne."
Sir Adam's eyes bulged at the revelation. Jaime's eyes flickered over to him.
"The children are not mine, but neither are they Baratheons. We've already sent letters all across the Seven Kingdoms, declaring Robert usurped and without heirs. The kingship is precarious, the perfect opportunity for Rhaegar Targaryen's last trueborn son to step up and take his throne." "I never took you for a Targaryen loyalist,"
Tywin replied, sneering at him. "I served Rhaegar Targaryen. I am honor-bound to serve his son. As everyone is so fond of saying, a Lannister always pays his debts. I owe him my life when he decided to save my head as it was on the executioner's block."
"You're not a Kingsguard anymore."
"That's true. Aemon dismissed me from the service as a favor to you, to gain your loyalty. Though saving my life should have been enough to earn that. I come back to Casterly Rock to set things in order and write a few more letters. And not only do I find the army languishing in front of Casterly Rock, but Sir Armory Lorch and Sir Gregor Clegane are both walking around still free as birds. You dare undermine my authority."
"I disagree with handing them over to the Martells. They are still of use,"
Tywin replied, dangerously quiet. The red of his voice only seemed to deepen in color.
"Their ilk are not welcome in the kingdom King Aemon is building. I will not risk them raping and pillaging their way through the countryside. Arrest them, or it won't be them I send to the Martells. It'll be you,"
Jaime said, his own voice deep and guttural, in his chest like a lion's growl. The silence in the chamber was absolute. Sir Kevin was aghast at the threat, and he kept glancing between Jaime and his brother. Lord Tywin was the one who pulled back first, and nodded curtly at him.
"Very well. Take them."
Jaime cocked his head at his father. Then he reached into his cloak and pulled out a folded-up piece of paper with the Targaryen seal. The firelight made the three-headed dragon on it appear alive.
"While I am settling things in order, this decree signed by the king himself orders that I shall not marry until my match has met the approval of the king."
The anger he saw in Tywin's eyes now trembled on his lips.
"It is high time you were married. You need an heir." "That can wait. I will marry when both myself and the king are satisfied with my bride,"
Jaime said, and for the first time since he arrived, he smiled.
"Now, if you'll excuse me, father, I have prisoners to detain. Sir Adam, what of your sister?"
Jaime had just reached the door, and just like that, his triumph was punctured. But he dare not turn to show his father. He settled for glaring at the door.
"You know what she did to me," he replied. "If what they say is true, there's no escaping it. The whole kingdom will know,"
Jaime said, and his very insides lurched. He'd rather be referred to as the Kingslayer for the rest of his life than known as the man who was raped by his sister. But the very public affair assured that the story would find its way across the entirety of the Seven Kingdoms, if not the world. It was something he was going to have to come to grips with.
"What is to be done with her?" If I had my way, she would be dead or spending the rest of her days in the black cells. King Aemon, however, has imprisoned her in luxury as befits a lady. And with that, he wrenched open the door and strode out. The chatter of the guests in the hall fell away once more as Jaime emerged from the side chamber and sauntered back down the way he came. Even in the dim light of the candles, there was no mistaking the triumphant smile on his face. No one was close enough to see how hollow it looked. As they once more descended in the lift, Sir Adam finally spoke up. "Lord Jaime, you can call me Jaime. Sir Adam, I imagine we'll spend enough time together from here on out. Are you sure that what you did was wise?" He struggled to push Cersei from his mind and focused once more on the victory he had claimed over his father. His eyes glittered. "Of course. I outrank my father now. Come hell or high water, he won't dare define me. I'm his heir. Everyone knows my father's feelings about me." "I have never seen anyone speak like that to your lord father. Not even your Aunt Jenna." "I'm the only one who can," Jaime said. "I expect you to accompany the army to King's Landing. Keep a close eye on my father. I want a detailed report when I rejoin you about whether he's been good." "He will probably suspect that of me," Sir Adam said, and his voice trembled a pale yellow. "Probably. With any luck, that will keep him from straying. Don't take any unnecessary chances." Sir Gregor Clegane was still in the training yards, but judging by the sprawling bodies that littered the area, he was just finishing. He had cleaved through the men, stripped from the waist up, and rivulets of blood could be seen trailing down all the parts of his skin. Jaime unsheathed his sword, and his eyes bore into the giant man. "What do you think you're doing?" Sir Adam said. "I want to take Clegane with as few casualties as possible. He knows better than to kill or hurt me, or it'll be his life." "You intend to send him to the Martells. It'll be his life anyway," Sir Adam whispered hysterically at him. "Relax, Adam. I'm the best sword in the Seven Kingdoms. Gather some men and make sure you have chains large enough and thick enough to contain him. If we have to keep him hog-tied the whole way down to Dorne, then we will." The men in the area all stared at him as he crossed the grounds with his sword drawn over to where the mountain towered. "Sir Gregor Clegane," Jaime announced. The fire orange of his voice cascaded around him in the cave, and the rock walls lent his voice authority. The mountain turned and nodded, taking note of the naked steel in his hand. "You are under arrest for the murder of Aegon Targaryen and the rape and murder of Princess Elia Martell." Jaime was forced to raise his sword when Clegane swiped at him. "Looks like Sir Adam was right," he thought, but paid the thought little mind as his blood roared and his sword sang. This was a dance he knew. For such a large man, the mountain was quick. But he was nothing compared to Jaime Lannister with his sword hand. It took time and extra strength, but the mountain was already worn down from his slaughtering of the prisoners. After a few minutes, Jaime smacked the hand with the sword, and with another smashed the broadside of his blade into the head of Clegane, and he crumpled to the ground in a heap. He sheathed his sword and turned to see a dozen soldiers had stopped what they were doing to watch the spectacle. "Chain him up. He leaves in the morn for Dorne." Adam fell into step as he once more stepped onto the lift to Casterly Rock. "Seven hells, Jaime. I knew you were good, but you fought like the warrior reborn." "I was born to fight," Jaime muttered. "I hope you don't mind conducting some of my business here. I have letters to write." Find Sir Armory Lorch and arrest him as well. He won't give you any trouble. And could you also look for a young squire by the name of Podrick Payne? Send him to me." "As you wish," Adam muttered, still staring as Jaime stepped onto the lift one last time. "Where will I find you?" "My old quarters should suffice." He found his room as he had left it nearly 16 years ago. He swiped a hand across the trunk and found a surprising lack of dust. His father must have ordered his room clean in the near vain hope that his golden heir would be released from his vows. One thing his room had always lacked, however, was a desk, and he sent the guard off to find him one. Learning to read and write had been like pulling teeth, but Lord Tywin had forced Jaime to persevere. He certainly wouldn't be able to manage being hand of the king without those skills. A knock at his door broke into his thoughts, and he hurried to open it, expecting Podrick Payne to be standing on the other side, and found Alysanne Lefford instead. He hoped his disappointment didn't show on his face. "What may I do for you, my lady?" "May I come in?" she asked, staring earnestly up into his face. She was dressed in a sky-blue dress that matched the blue on our house's coat of arms. In another life, a match with Alysanne Lefford would have been reasonable. It was rare for Tywin to wish to marry within the Westerlands, but the Lord Paramount every once in a while extended a hand and elevated one of their most loyal houses. She was certainly pretty, with her pale skin and hair, so dark it was almost black. In another life, Tywin would have been loath to stain the Lannister blonde hair and green eyes with brown. He reluctantly pulled open the door for her. As heir of Casterly Rock, he had to foment goodwill, and the least he could do after calling off their marriage was offer her an explanation. "I presume you're here to ask about our cancelled wedding," he said. "Your father said that, by the order of the king, only he could approve of your bride?" she asked carefully. His lips twitched with a smile. Most women would still be in the midst of charming and cajoling him, but she cut right to the heart of the matter. Her voice was a soothing turquoise, but there was no hiding the tremor of anxiety in the ripples. No one could hide such feelings from him any more. "That's correct. I have another copy of the decree right here if you want to see it," Jaime replied, pulling out another sealed parchment. She gingerly accepted it, but hesitated upon seeing the dragon seal. Her fingers brushed it, and her breath seemed to hitch. There was no denying the pain the Targaryens had caused in all their lifetimes, and it wasn't unreasonable to expect the lords and ladies to be apprehensive to support the Targaryens' return to the throne. She snapped it open, unfolded it, and read silently. She returned her eyes to his and saw hope. He had to work to stifle a cruel smile. It would almost be pleasurable to snuff that hope out like one kicked dirt over a dying fire. However, hadn't he vowed to himself in his last life that he would no longer treat the ones underneath him like sheep? He swallowed the cruel words threatening to leave his mouth and stayed quiet. "So, there's a chance I might still win your hand?" "Impress the king, and he may yet approve of our match." "Is there a chance for us?" He didn't answer, but merely cocked his head. "You love another," she practically whispered, and stepped back towards the door, the hope dying in her eyes. "There are plenty of younger, better men available to you. If you're so inclined, I'm sure the king will arrange a match for you." There was another knock at the door. Jaime opened it, and to reveal two men carrying a desk into the room. It was a huge,
garish oak desk inlaid with gold, but it would work for his short time at Casterly Rock. He turned to Lady Alysanne. "I don't mean to be rude, my lady, but I have a lot of work to do. I hope you enjoy your stay at the Rock." She gave him a wan smile, handed back the royal decree, and departed. He would say she was heartbroken, except he had never even met her. If she thought she was in love with him, it was bound to be merely an idea of who he was. Either that, or it was because of his status as Lord Lannister, the most powerful house in Westeros. "Brienne, I can't wait to meet you soon enough," he thought, mournfully. He had hoped it wouldn't be uncovered for some time that he obviously had a bride in mind, but there were few other reasons to delay or outright cancel a wedding that didn't involve one half of a party dying. Once situated at his desk, he dismissed the guards and pulled out a piece of parchment toward him. Reporting to Aemon would be simple enough, but he decided the first letter he needed to get out of the way was the one to Lord Varys. He'd had little else to do on the voyage to Casterly Rock, where he was either bored from being unable to train, too ill to even leave his cabin, or too afraid to fall asleep from the endless nightmares that paraded across his eyes at night. Cersei now turned into an undead white while she was raping him, and it was enough to wish he had never had to fall asleep again. During those early morning hours, he desperately sought around for something else to think about, and his mind settled on the problem of gaining King's Landing. Most notably, his thoughts centered around the two most dangerous wildcards, Littlefinger and Varys. He knew that Varys was marginally trustworthy. He cared about the stability of the realm, and at the time, the realm had been in dangerous upheaval as a result of the Mad King Aerys. Varys had happily kowtowed to Robert when he arrived to claim the throne. To Robert's credit, the realm enjoyed a relatively stable peace with only the Ironborn rebellion to mar it. However, it was slowly tipping over into unstable grounds with the way Robert abused the treasury. At the moment, it was safer, for Varys, to remain allied with the Baratheons, but he would be quickly searching for a new alliance with him and Aemon once he saw the board. Fortunately for Varys, he was immensely valuable with his knowledge of the Red Keep. If they had to crack the keep, then the knowledge of the hidden tunnels would be useful. Jaime already knew of some of them from the previous life, but it wouldn't hurt to know a few more, and to also warn Varys about tipping the Baratheon brothers off to their whereabouts. Lord Baelish was another issue altogether. He and Aemon had been very careful about where they had their conversations, and took extra care to keep their voices down. Both men had spies everywhere, and he wouldn't be surprised if they already knew the information that no one outside of himself, Aemon, Ned, and Sir Barristan knew. It was important to catch Baelish at King's Landing before he could squirrel away somewhere. But he rather doubted that Littlefinger would allow himself to become trapped in a besieged city. Jaime had no idea how to catch Baelish, so he focused on persuading Varys to their cause. If anyone could catch Lord Baelish, it would be the Master of Whispers. He was in the middle of the letter, had already restarted twice, when he heard another knock at the door and shouted for the man to enter. He glanced up at the door opened and found himself staring at a young Podrick Payne who had yet to hit his growth spurt. My lord said... He instantly fell silent when Jaime held a finger up to stop him and continued writing. It took another 10 minutes before he was satisfied with the letter and began folding it to set it aside. Then he waved his fingers over and Pod tentatively stepped closer.
"You're Podrick Payne, cousin to Sir Ilan Payne, correct?"
Yes, my lord, I'm of a lesser branch, Pod said. His voice was a pale yellow squeak. He also kept shifting his feet, clenching and unclenching his hands. If he wasn't drenched by the rain, he imagined the boy would be drenched with sweat.
"I am sorry to be the one who has to inform you of this, but your cousin Sir Ilan Payne has died. There was a coup in Winterfell for the kingdom, and Sir Ilan unfortunately fell," Jaime said, though there was no remorse in his voice. If he had any fondness for the old knight, it was because he made a good training partner when he lost his hand. Though it may have just been his job. Jaime wasn't about to shed tears for a man who tried to kill him.
"Thank you, my lord."
"I imagine King Aemon has already sent a letter to House Payne, with regards, and has promised the safe return of his body. However, I think more can be done to recompensate House Payne for its losses. How old are you?"
4 and 10, my lord."
"How long have you been a squire?"
Pod blinked. The boy was clearly not lacking wits. Why would the heir of Casterly Rock have an interest in him? 6 months or so, my lord.
"You don't have to say my lord after every answer," Jaime said,
though he couldn't hide his amusement.
"As for recompensate for your family's unfortunate loss, I am prepared to take you on as my squire."
The boy gasped, and appeared to go weak in the knee, that he was on the verge of collapse. But he caught himself and cast his eyes down, blushing profusely. "You honor me, my lord. Would that I could, but I am already the squire of a brave and honorable knight. I am bound to him," Pod replied. He drew his mouth into a firm line and continued staring down Jaime like he was facing the stranger himself.
"Your loyalty to your knight is admirable, but loyalty is a two-way street. It wouldn't take more than 100 gold dragons to buy you from your knight. Being loyal is important, but picking the right people to be loyal to is equally important. I will not do wrong by you, Podrick Payne. Though I may be hand to the king, I will make the time and effort to train you to sword fight and see you knighted. So, what'll it be?"
To his credit, Pod looked torn, and he was reluctant to be pulled away from his original duty. Finally, he said, "I would be greatly honored to be your squire, my lord."
"Thank you. Why don't you get plates for both of us? I'll finish my letter writing, and we'll discuss our arrangement."
Pod bustled out the door, nearly tripping over his overgrown feet like a puppy. Once the door was closed, Jaime couldn't keep from chuckling.